Well, greetings everyone. I am John Crook. My call is N9UPC. Thank you for joining me for this presentation on digital voice and ARES races, basically leveraging the digital voice comms. So I want to go ahead and first of all thank the Wisconsin ARES races organization for putting on another conference this year, even if it is a cyber fashion. And I also want to go ahead and take the time to thank the event organizers and sponsors for allowing me to present again this year in regards to digital voice. Digital voice is obviously something that's becoming very big in the realm of amateur radio, and with numerous questions that people tend to have over and over again in regards to it, I'm even starting to see that more and more people are pushing for digital voice communications. And I think this PowerPoint is going to kind of present some interesting information about it. I guess first of all, I want to introduce myself a little bit more for those of you that may not know me. Once again, my name is John Crook. My call is N9UPC. I am the St. Croix County ARES Races EC. I have used and experimented with all the different digital modes out there for voice. So it doesn't matter regardless of which digital voice mode it is. I've played with it. There's good to all the digital voice modes. There's bad to all the digital voice modes here. But there is some abilities to use digital voice modes. So I've kind of played with it and found the good, the bad, and the ugly kind of each of them. I do own and operate different digital voice systems, I should say, in general. That's not only on a amateur basis, but also on a personal business communication type basis. So those that can be used in the business world, I've used those. Those can be used in the amateur world, I've used those, and kind of everything in between. And I do work in different communication fields also too. Not just someone that you can kind of look behind me, my dirty workbench here and stuff like that on there. But I have, experimented and worked with P25, as a user, as a technician, as, an owner, proprietor. Same thing with DMR, NextDen, the different ones out there, played with Fusion, played with D-Star, all those on there. So it kind of all comes into play. I do want to give a disclosure though, due to my various different positions, this presentation is not being supported by any one person or company, and the presenter, which is me, is not receiving any forms of compensation. So we just want to give that disclosure on there in case some people think that I might be sort of showing favoritism to one digital mode or not. It's not really that in any way, shape, or form on there. So let's talk a little bit about what today's presentation is going to entail. I'm going to talk about digital voice modes out there. There's a couple of them on there. I want to give a brief overview and to kind of understand. We need to then talk about means of digital voice access. We need to talk about crossing digital modes. And then I put ARES, question, races, digital voice advantages. And I kind of put that question mark in there to kind of sort of be a little funny. Not like a typo, but kind of be sort of funny. Is like, can we use it in ARES? Can we use it in races? Does it play? Does it not? Can we question the two together? And you'll see through this presentation that there are a couple different aspects of it. So that's why it's kind of written that way on there, and also keeps you on your toes too. So I would say start off whenever I talk about digital voice modes. This is obviously Walter from Jeff Dunham, and digital is the devil. And I say that, and I always get a kick out of that when I say that, because really there are some people that truly do believe this, that digital is the devil. Digital voice is the devil. Digital data is the devil. FT8 is ruining the HF communication world, and digital voice is going to be right up there with the different digital data modes, and it's going to ruin it. And it's really not, okay? It's really not. Digital is going to offer us something that we don't have currently. And it allows for expansion of features. It allows expansion of experimentation. It also really starts to allow us to do efficient usage of the frequency spectrum. At the time of this presentation here, depending on when you're watching it, we're dealing with the loss of possibly 3 gigahertz. Now that can have a serious impact on the amateur band, especially, with the other presentations going on today. But as you take a look at this chart, you see how we were existing repeater channels. We had to have that big 25 kilohertz spacing on there. And what we did is we said, we're getting crowded. Everybody and their brother needs a frequency, all right? And that's where a lot of like trunk radio systems in the business world has kind of come into play, public safety systems and everything. But guess what? We don't have that in the amateur world. We don't have the luxury of having trunk radio networks, let alone do we want to necessarily have trunked radio networks? Because it's great if we're all in one condensed space, but the neat part about amateur radio is we're not. We're spread out. We're, globally, we're regionally, we're those kind of things like that. And I may be talking to one person, where I live in Baldwin, Wisconsin, but maybe I want to talk to someone who's in, let's say, Chicago or Minneapolis or Ohio or something like that, whatever the case may be. They're not going to be able to hit the same network I am. So that's where it comes down to is different frequency uses and different frequency expansions on there. And as you can see from the chart here, we're talking about existing repeater channels, how we can interlace channels into there, and then how we can even make more allocations of channels to take place with this. So to understand what we're going to talk about today, some people may understand digital, some people may not. So we're going to do kind of just a quick review here, just super quick review. If you saw my presentations in the past, if you know about digital, just kind of sit through here. I'm just laying the foundation here. So first of all, digital voice uses a digital protocol format, a digital modulation format, and then a vocoder. Now the vocoder is the magic. The vocoder is taking my mouth, my voice, that's the words that are coming out of my mouth, putting into the microphone, and then it's changing it all to the data bits and sending the data bits out through the radio. However, you need all three of them to have a digital voice transmission. If you don't have the protocol format, if you don't have the modulation format, especially if you don't have the vocoder, you don't have it. Okay, you just don't have it at all on there. So right now, let's talk about the protocol formats, what we're going to call protocol formats. So when I'm talking protocol here, to understand in digital, we have to go down a road. Think of it as a road. Frequencies are a road for our digital transmissions, our analog transmissions, any transmission, okay, to go down, all righty? And what we have to do in the digital world is analog, we just sent it down. That was it, boom, not a problem whatsoever. Digital is a little different. In digital, we need to go ahead and determine how we're sending it down the road. Are we sending it down in frequency division, meaning we're taking and slicing the road as lanes, or are we sending it as time division, which we're going ahead and sending it actually like through like car lengths, okay? Like we're saying, hey, here's a car length, here's what we want to go ahead and do. Now, with that being said, what we need to then take a look at is we need to say which is going to be used or which is going to be better. Well, guess what? There's really no one set better than the other. They both achieve and accomplish the same thing. It's just how they're going ahead and doing it. But now we need to switch over to the digital modulation formats. And in essence, two general ones exist, but there's technically three classifications, and I'll explain it. So GMSK is the one that was used the most out there, and that's Gaussian minimum shift keying. So it's basically a modulation format of sending your ones and zeros down the road. The other one is 4FSK, so 4-level frequency shift keying, and then there is C4FM, which is continuous 4-level frequency modulation. Now, if we want to get granular on this, C4FM is technically sort of like a subset of 4FSK. However, it's still considered on its own because of the way it's implemented or the way it's used in some of the aspects and some of the digital voice protocols that are all out there. Now, we come to vocoders. So now think of it, if we're gonna kind of use an analogy or example, we're making a cake, we're making cookies, we're using some sort of recipe. So the digital protocol format, we have the digital modulation format, now we have the vocoder. So now we're gonna mix all these three things together in this nice bowl, and it's gonna come out into a digital voice mode. Now, three really exist for two-way communications. So the first one that we have out there is IMBE, which is improved multiband excitation. Now, what does that mean? Well, that was the first one that was kind of out of the gates. IMBE was kind of the first generation of P25 radios out there, and it really kind of caught as a good kind of vocoder to be used out there. But as things continued, as time continued, they said we can improve on these kind of things. And then they came out with the AMBE or the AMBE Plus. Now, AMBE stands for Advanced Multiband Excitation. So what that basically is meaning is it's taking the vocoder and it's basically converting it to the data using the digital protocol and the digital modulation formats that are out there. And then finally, we have AMBE Plus 2, which is just, once again, the next revision, the next thing, that's coming out there. And here's a good point to point out. These vocoders are licensed by DVSI. And I bring this up all the time because usually about this time, people start to get into this thing of going ahead and saying, you know what? All digital voice modes are proprietary. No, they're not proprietary. And the reason they're not proprietary is because the code is open on there, okay? So that means you can go ahead and use the code however you want. Yes, you do need a vocoder, and currently right now, the patent is held by DVSI. However, there are always strides in advancement being made in the SDR world and software development and stuff like that that are now actually making these chips more readily flexible in usage and pricing, and going to the part where, you know, you can really sort of start to do downloading and decoding of digital different voice formats without the need to have one of these AMBE vocoders that are out there. So that's kind of that sticky subject that always gets in there that always people throw at in regards to digital voice technology. So now that we have all three of these things in there, we start to go ahead and put the pieces together. And when we start to put them in certain different combinations, whether it's FDMA or TDMA, and then whether we want to use GMSK versus 4FSK or C4FM, and then adding with vocoders, we get a combination out there, okay? You know, it's like a combination padlock. And then what we're getting, for the most part, which we're going to talk about, is the 5 main different digital voice modes that are out there today. So there's 2 categories, as we've talked about in the past, and that's amateur designed and based, and then there are commercial or LMR based. Now, when I say amateur designed and based, these are protocols that are designed to fulfill the needs of the amateur radio operation. And what I mean by that is it mean to actually a person go ahead and saying, listen, here's the deal. I want a digital voice that will be legal for identification, will work in the amateur bands, has this flexibility for an amateur-based world. Well, guess what? There are 2 automatically that do that. Well, then there are some that are commercial and LMR-based, and they say, you know what? You can use them in the amateur world, but there's some sort of little quagmires or little holdups that you got to go ahead and do because they're not designed to work in the amateur world. So we're going to cover all 5 of these, okay? And the first one we're going to start out with is called D-Star. D-Star was created by the Japan Amateur Radio League as kind of a digital voice standard out there. It uses, now here's where we come into combinations, it uses GMSK, FDMA, and the AMBE plus vocoder. Now, with a D-Star, they designed it to do a voice and data protocol. So you do voice at 4800 baud and you do data at a slower rate, but you could still do data at the simultaneous times. In addition, you'll see at the bandwidth here, the FCC actually has an FCC emission designator for the usage of D-Star. So they recognize that it is a part of a bandwidth and a protocol that can be used. The next one we're going to talk about is Yaesu System Fusion. It's created by Yaesu. Protocol is open and published on their website. It uses C4FM, FDMA, and AMB plus 2 vocoders. So as you see, once again, we're doing these combinations of, you know, digital voice protocol, digital voice format, and then the vocoder. Has data rates at 9600 baud for voice and then 9600 baud for data. And it does meet the FCC 12.5 kilohertz FCC designation for bandwidth on there. And as you see, there is the designator on the screen there. Next one we're going to talk about is DMR. Now, DMR comes out of an ETSI standard. It's European Telecommunication Standards Institute, and it's standard listed as TS 102.361-2. Now, this is the main one we're dealing with, and the reason I bring this up is because now we're getting into the area of digital voice formats or protocols that are actually designed for business or LMR, okay, operations. So what we mean by that is that these were designed for usage of, you know, Joe's Plumbing and Heating and Cooling, okay, Dan's Trucking Company, you know, Carol's Cleaning Service, business companies and agencies that want to be able to use a digital voice for radio on there, okay? They don't want to use analog voice for business. Now, DMR uses that 4FSK, the TDMA, and the AMBE plus 2 vocoder. So, before we haven't had TDMA used. We were talking about FDMA, and then we were talking about C4FM and GMSK. Now we're introducing 4FSK. So we're kind of, once again, creating these mixes. Now with DMR, to even show that it's more of a commercial business standard, it allows for 2 time slots on a single frequency. So basically what you can do is a repeater can have 2 simultaneous conversations on that frequency or that repeater frequency without an issue. As you can see, the FCC has a couple of designator bandwidths on there, and just in general. Depends on if you're going to be using data or if you're going to be using voice, or you're going to be using a mixture of the two. Excuse me. All right, now we get into P25 Phase One. Now, P25 was created by APCO 25 for a common air interface. What APCO 25 is, it's an organization for professional communicators. They basically set the standard of public safety. Now, as you see, they're using C4FM also. They're also using FDMA and the IMBE or the AMBE plus 2 vocoder. They have voice baud rates at 9600 also, and they have the FCC designation. Now, this is where we're going to get a little interesting here, is because, you know what, that's the same kind of thing that Fusion was using. However, in this case, it's all coming down to how they use the C4FM. So there's a more granular level that we're not going to necessarily touch in this presentation here, but it's important to understand these different aspects of the digital voice protocol formats and vocoders on there. So P25 Phase One, once again, this is going to be mainly primarily used in a lot of your public safety agencies and for public safety purposes. All right, and the final standard we're going to talk about is the NextGen standard. Once again, it's created as a common air interface. That's what CAI means. And basically, I referenced that before, like with the P25. And what that basically states is saying, okay, if I have a P25 radio in my hand, and Bill over here has a P25 radio in his hand, Bill and I will be able to talk if we are using the P25 standard. Same thing with NextGen. If myself and Susie are going to be talking with, and we both have NextGen radios, we know that the common air interface is going to be NextGen. So if we talk radio to radio, we have all the parameters and programming set correctly, guess what? We're going to be able to communicate and talk with one another. The data rates are 4,800 baud or 4,800 or 48K, sometimes it's referred to as baud on there. And it does have emission standards for 12.5 kilohertz or 6.25 kilohertz. So let's move on now. So we got that down pat, right? Okay, we got the different digital voice mode formats on there. Let's talk about a means of digital voice access. Now, this is where ECs, this is where system planners, this is where your MCOM groups, your, all your FEMA 3-digit letter people, COMLs, COMTs, COMCOMs, whatever, need to start thinking about this, because this is how you're going to take and leverage digital voice systems in an MCOM situation. All righty. I would love to say that when we're using digital voice, it's going to be, oh, guess what? I'm going to come into the scene, turn on my radio here, and blah, 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 and everything's going to be fine. No, you do have to do pre-planning. And unfortunately, unlike using like an ICS 205 form or something like that for analog channels, we have to plan networks. And instead of necessarily planning like frequencies we're going to use or channels we're going to use to be able to communicate one another, now what we're doing is we're planning and creating networks that have to talk to one another on there. So you have 3 core methods in existence in how to access digital voice networks. All righty. You have repeater access, you have spot devices, or you have direct network accesses. Read that line here, folks. One method is not superior to the other, and multiple methods do exist. I'm going to repeat that. One method is not superior to the other, and multiple methods do exist. Okay. You're going to hear me here in terms of the left Twix versus right Twix. Okay. That's going to happen a lot today. And this is a good example of the left Twix versus right Twix. You will talk to some digital people that use it, and there are some people that'll swear by the repeater. You aren't getting on anything on a digital voice network unless it's a repeater. That's the only true way. That's the only good way that it's going to work. And other people say, no, I'm going to use a spot device. What we mean by a spot device is like a jumbo spot, a zoom spot, an open spot, those little devices that either you just need to provide internet to them, or they plug into like a Raspberry Pi. And then you have direct network access. And the direct network access is kind of actually a cool thing. What it does basically is it allows you to not necessarily have to use a radio to be able to communicate into a network to talk to people who want to use a radio. But it also plays a significant part in how the networks are going to connect together. All righty. So repeaters are broken down into 2 categories. This is important to understand: true digital repeater or modified or converted digital repeater. So what I mean by that is that you're going to have a situation where someone's going to buy a true digital repeater. They're going to buy an actual, Fusion or D-Star repeater. They're going to actually buy a DMR repeater. They're going to buy an actual P25 repeater. Or there are people that will go and then they will buy these little boards, sometimes called MMDVM boards and stuff. And then these MMDVM boards basically act like a repeater controller, but what they're doing is they're taking in the digital signal, decoding it, and sending it back out on the network as a digitally encoded signal on there. So you could do this with some of the analog equipment that's on there. So that's another great point about digital voice is that you're repurposing old analog only equipment on there. So here's a couple examples of some true digital repeaters. Here we have a Yaesu repeater, D-Star repeater, Motorola repeater. All of them natively do their respective digital voice protocols. There's none that go ahead and do anything different on there, okay? But that's the essence of a true digital voice repeater. Here's a picture of the modified or converted digital repeaters. Now in here you see these boards plug in with cables to the repeater somehow, like on something, you know, they're going to need a core sense, they're going to need audio in, they're going to need audio out, and they're going to connect it to the repeater, and they're going to turn these repeaters, these radios, into digital radios because they house the vocoder chip on there. They house the digital voice format on the board. Okay, some of them, like I said, do need like a Raspberry Pi or something to operate, so you know you have that aspect of things. But once again, this is how you have the two digital repeaters. Now let's talk about spot devices. Spot devices popped up on the radar about 3-4 years ago, and they've been going strong ever since. A lot of people like hotspot devices. And what really these hotspot devices are is, I have it listed as in the VHF band, but there are actually UHF band, but there are actually VHF ones out there now too. They're small, they're tiny little devices, about 10 to 20 milliwatts. I mean, they're milliwatts, folks. And what they're designed to do is they're designed for you to set up in your house. Okay, they're small, they're compact, they're out of the way. Set up in your house, set up, you know, by your favorite lounge chair, set up downstairs, set up by the router, don't care where. But what it does is it basically acts as a radio. Now I get to go ahead and come in with my digital radio, and I get to go ahead and now key up, and I could talk on my favorite frequency that goes to the hotspot device, and then that goes out on the networks to go ahead and talk to. One thing that spot devices really gained a lot of credibility, I will put it, is that for the longest time, people had to buy a radio and the spot device or have access to a network for the radio that you had. So if you had a Fusion radio or you had a DMR radio, you had to be on a Fusion network or you had to be on a DMR network. You couldn't, you can't take my Fusion radio and talk to D-Star, can't take my D-Star, talk to P25. P25 can't talk to DMR. No, it didn't work that way. However, what happened was that people who designed these things, designed the software and everything, that they started to go and they said, you know what? We can make that conversion. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But basically, you come in on RF and you go out on the network side of things in a different voice format. There was no rules against that. So they kind of broke down the wall. But you'll see why that is important, why that's the advancement of digital radio here. Now, these are the things here you have are considered direct network access devices. So these devices are usually plugged into a computer. They are usually something that is offering it in regards to the aspect of saying, I am directly connecting to the internet. And while maybe I have a microphone or a headset or a speaker mic or something like that that talks into this device, there's no RF going from me to that device to go down the networks then. It's actually just audio coming in. So this is a direct network access device. Brief examples, what I have up on the screen here. There are many, 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 many more devices that are becoming more readily available as time goes on. The issue and the thing that comes into play is, what device do you use that's going to be beneficial to you? So certain devices use different programming parameters for digital voice access. You really do have to kind of understand how they're set up and where you're going out on the network. This is a key thing here. You can't, you know, let's use analog for example. If I want to go ahead and talk to someone, I decide on a frequency and I decide on a subaudible tone, right? If I want to do that, PL or DPL, whatever the case may be, CTCS or DCS. But in essence, I'm just picking a frequency and talking, right? Digital has a few more parameters, all right? And it's those parameters that come into play that really decide, am I going to talk locally to Bill? Am I going to talk regionally through my repeater? Am I going to go out statewide? Am I going to go nationwide? Can I connect to a friend in England versus a friend in Australia directly? Is it a group or is it a private chat? You know, those kind of things like that. So that's where digital voice kind of has that steep learning curve for some. And that's why you tend to see people when they camp out on a digital voice mode, they're camping out on that mode. They don't want to be able to have to go and say, man, you know, I want to talk to Bill and he's got this radio, and I want to talk to Susie and she's got this radio, and I want to talk to Dee Dee and she's got, no. That's not going to work. I can't blame you. And you'll see here in a little bit when we kind of start to slice the digital modes even a little bit more. The other cool thing about this digital voice access is the type of access that's out there. We now have app and telephone access, which kind of sort of goes under the direct network applications on there. But when you connect to a digital voice system via of a network, these applications do exist. They provide connections to digital voice and analog voice networks, and are based on either direct telephone IP or like a SIP phone. If it's accessible. Now, one thing this is important part to talk about too is that when you start getting into direct access, you are now able to pull in your analog users. We'll talk about that in a minute here in the power presentation here, but that's a key thing. That's a key thing because when you are going to be using digital voice, you are really going to have to adopt this statement, especially if you're going to use it for ARES, RACES, MCOM purposes. You are going to have to go ahead and say, you're going to have to say, no user left behind, okay? And once again, no user left behind. So if we go back to the beginning PowerPoint presentation, we had Walter. Walter's digital is the devil. When you're planning your networks, especially in MCOM situations, ARES, RACES, those things, you can't exclude anyone. You have to be inclusive. You can't be exclusive. All right. So let's talk about these digital voice modes, because we talked about access, but we got to understand how things are coming together. How hard is this going to be to link these digital modes? So you're going to have to know us, especially if you want to use this thing. You got to be sort of a subject matter expert on it, and you got to kind of do it quickly. So Yaesu System Fusion, when you're using Yaesu System Fusion, very simple, very basic, not anything really too in particular. It does utilize a thing called DGID, which stands for Digital Group ID, and it sort of acts like a digital CTCSS or a digital PL tone. And what I mean by that is you know, if I tune to a frequency, and let's say I want to talk to my dad, okay, N9VAO, we may pick a simplex frequency, and I don't want to be interrupted by, you know, noise or something like that or whatever. We may pick a CTCSS tone of, let's say, 100. Okay, well, digital doesn't. Digital is ones and zeros. It's not a waveform. So what we have to do then is we have to have something that filters it out. DGID acts like that CTCSS tone. You can also, with Fusion, you can also use DTMF commands to for digital access and digital means and control. All right. Now let's take a look at D-Star. D-Star is considered the next easiest mode for digital voice access. So right away, the two amateur ones that are out there, Fusion and D-Star here, they're designed for that purpose. They're designed for easy integration, easy operation. Why? Because it's an amateur thing. It's not, you're going to have people who want to change parameters, want to change settings on it. They don't want to have to hook up a computer to it and stuff like that, like most land mobile radio systems do because of Part 90, Part 95 reasons on there. One thing that D-Star uses, it employs the usage of call sign for access to devices. So what you can do with D-Star is, with some of the systems, is you can do call sign routing on there, which plays a significant part depending on how you're going to be connecting out to reflectors and stuff like that on there. But then also too is depending on how you may integrate systems, you may need to think about that as an option for it to be done and for it to be done correctly. And then the neat thing about D-Star is it offers more of a granular means to general access. And what I mean by that is once again, for example, the call sign routing, if I want to specifically search out a user on the D-Star system, I can enter their call sign. It's kind of like a call sign hunt kind of feature on there. So it kind of gets really granular when we need to do these kind of aspects and things on there. All right, let's talk about DMR. DMR requires three main components to have the access. Now, DMR, once again, now we're into this public safety, LMR, business band frequency design technology on there, which the amateur community is not really going to use. One, I guess, big thing I should have pointed out with Fusion, with D-Star, They're designed for amateurs. So when you put a digital ID in that radio, you're putting in your call sign. Okay, if I was doing N9 UPC, I put that into the radio. As we talk about DMR, P25, and next gen, you're going to see there's no aspect to put in a alphanumeric call sign. I cannot enter N9 UPC into the ID of that radio. I enter a number, okay? Why? Because in the business world, the LMR world, we're numbers, we're badge numbers, we're unit numbers. We're not individual call signs on there, okay? So that's where you're going to see, as we get these next DMR here and these next two ones, you'll see why sometimes that business stuff is hard to translate over. Getting back to DMR though, the main components you have to have is color code, time slot, and talk group. So color code sort of acts like the PL for DMR. You have 0 through 15. 0 is kind of sort of like an open one, but 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through 15. That selects you to access the repeater. Then you have a time slot. So remember, DMR lets you have two conversations. So you have to figure out if you're going down path 1 or you're going to go down path 2 of, excuse me, the repeater. And that's important because when you've picked a path, now you have to pick the talk group. So what happens is that I need access to the repeater. I need to know if I'm going down the time slot 1 or time slot 2. And depending on which side of the road I'm going down on, I need to know if I'm going to talk to which group of people, because you could have different groups of people per time slot. Maybe when I have time slot 1, it's linked to other DMR repeaters and I could talk to other people on different talk groups. Or time slot 2 might be local. I need to be able to talk to people locally, that kind of thing like that. So that's where it kind of comes in a little play. The 3 are required because it gives an upper level and lower level purpose of access. So that's where we're talking about, once again here, prepping you, spooling you up and saying, you know, hey, have to think about the planning because we're no longer dealing with frequencies. We're dealing with means of access to get into the network. Alrighty. P25 or APCO 25 requires the need for 2 settings for access. When we're talking about access, once again, we're saying, how can we access the repeater? How can we access the hotspot, you know, those devices? The first would be a NAC code and then a talk group. Now, when I say NAC code stands for Network Access Code. And what that translates to is it translates to going ahead and saying, okay, the NAC code sort of acts like the PL tone for the P25, the CTCSS tone. So you have to have that matched up first to be able to allow the repeater or the device to hear you. Then, since you don't have multiple paths, you just have one path, we don't need to worry about time slots, but we need to worry about the talk group. Well, once again, who are we going to talk to on the talk group? If you notice, like DMR, it has a upper level and a lower level of access, but it's not so granular in nature as DMR is on there. So we have NextN. Now, NextN is very similar to P25 in nature for the 2 main elements. Instead of using NAC codes, we're going to be using RAN codes, which is repeater access numbers, okay? What does that basically translate to? It, once again, that PL CTCSS tone for the repeaters, okay? RAN codes have a certain limit. I think it's 125, 126. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head right now. But then you have the talk groups for access. Once again, upper level, lower level of usage on there for this digital type of voice that exists. Now let's get into the core of what we're kind of talking here. Let's talk about crossing digital modes. Now, as we talk about crossing digital modes, I want you to keep an open head. The reason I need you to keep an open head is for one key purpose. There's never going to be one undefined digital mode. It's not going to happen, folks. Not going to happen at all. But what we can do is we can bring everybody to the playground. We can bring everybody to the sandbox and let them play with their toys. So you can bring your Tonka trucks and I can bring my Hot Wheels, and she can bring her Barbies and someone else can bring their G.I. Joes. Whatever the analogy you wish to, excuse me, use, you use it. Use it hands down, okay? But you have to keep an open mind on this, because how or what you want to achieve or link to will dictate how your crossing of the digital modes is going to take place, all right? So once again, usage or selection of one digital mode does not restrict you only to that mode, All right, and people have created bridges and links and all this kind of between the digital modes, so it's not difficult to do. At first it was. If we rewind back to about 3 years ago, it was It was a laborious task to say it. It was like, oh, this and this and this. And then you had RF links and you had all this choppiness. It was really horrible. But now, we said that was okay in the amateur world, but in the public safety world, they were linking digital voice networks too, and they did it a little bit better. So we kind of sort of took ideas from the public safety world, but then we applied our own things and it made it different. And the way we made it different is now we have basically 3 different means of connecting the digital networks together. Now, I want you to clear your mind before we start. Now, I know this is weird, but why are we clearing our mind? I want you to clear your mind. All right. And the reason I want you to do that is because when I'm talking about these things, I want you to imagine the pieces, look at the diagrams, and it's going to go ahead and determine how you want to plan out your network. Now, big caveat at the bottom, how or what method you use is going to be 100% dependent upon your need, desire, want, or what your exact goal or issue is going to be. All right. What I mean is that, as an example, if you as the single user of one digital mode need to access another network, okay, of a different digital mode, the responsibility might fall within you, okay, because the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many. All right, we've all heard that before in Star Trek's The Search for Spock. All right, but it comes into play of when you're trying to create these crossing of digital modes, how can you build the infrastructure that works? Because if you require that person to be able to cross it over, you could have a whole nest of issues. All right. So we're going to talk about the network layer. And what we mean by the network layer is just that. It's all done at the network level. We have a digital signal that's coming in from an RF source, but it's coming in on data already. So if we use this example, I call my radio here. I talk to my repeater, my hotspot. It then hops the internet and it shoots down the internet to a server, a location somewhere in cyberspace. All right. And it's going in one format. Now on the picture you see here, there's like 2 servers. They got a black line. That's where the transcoding is taking place. So the server on the left is saying, I'm receiving digital voice format A. I'm going to convert it to server network level language, send it over to server B, and server B is going to take that and convert it and send it out in digital format B. So you have A come in one format, servers convert it, talk to one another, goes out B on a different digital voice format. So that's the network layer, okay? Now, as the network layer takes place, you can have a couple of different ways this takes place. So example, you have to figure out how are the 2 servers talking to one another. Is the signal already coming in decoded digital data, or are you needing to use a vocoder, such as like an AMBE +2? With this though, when you're doing the network layer, this is why we talked about the different types of digital voice technology out there, is just because of some of the protocols that's used and because of some of the bandwidth and some other factors that come into play, you cannot always cross digital mode A to digital mode B. So an example, DMR and Fusion. DMR uses that 6.25 kilohertz bandwidth for the time slot and repeater. So there's 6.25 and 6.25 total equals 12.5. Okay. Fusion, when using digital narrow mode, is already in 6.25. So therefore, you can cross DMR to Fusion without any issue. However, P25 is not 6.25. It is 12.5. So if you're trying to go ahead and put a 6.25 signal in there, you're going to go ahead and you're going to have some issues because it's going to go in there and it's going to bounce around, as an analogy, okay? And when the bouncing around takes place, it's not going to work right. When it doesn't work right, guess what? Now you have problems. Now you have an issue that, hey, I can't get these 2 digital voice modes to talk to one another. So when you are looking at server stuff, when you're looking at that network layer or level, You really have to take some time to think, who do I need to talk to, and how do I get my little electrical ion from here over to here while hopping through like a game of Pitfall on Atari. All right. So now let's talk about the different ones. So some people go and say, well, you know what, at a network level, I can't cross, DMR to P25 because, the different bandwidth and this and this and this and this. How can I do it? Well, you can do it on a hardware level. So here's one example of a hardware level. They have these devices out there called JPS ACUs, voters, excuse me, voters, different devices that basically take your radio, take the audio coming out of your radio, going into this device, and for the most part at an analog level layer, converts it, sends it out to the other device. When it sends it out to the other device, it's going to encode it from analog to digital. So this is sometimes called double vocoding. It can be problematic if you don't use it right. A lot of people said, well, I'm going to take radio A, which is one format. I'm going to take radio B, which is another format. I'm going to take the speaker out of this and put it in the mic here, and the speaker out of here and put it into the mic here, and then this and this, and then it sounds horrible. You need to have some audio balancing. It's like, you almost need to have a repeater controller in there. However, as time is going on, we're starting to see more and more and more hardware that's automatically doing transcoding, okay, or automatically changing signals. So for an example here, you see you have two of these Maxon repeaters. They're taking the digital in and passing it on to digital, but they can also take analog in on one of them and then pass it over to digital. And then they can do that kind of crisscrossing thing. So what's happening is that a lot of the people out there that are doing this digital voice, a lot of making products are saying, you know what? People want to be able to have more flexibility and fluidness to be able to talk on the different digital modes, but more importantly, connect them. Once again, as I'm talking here, we talk about network, we're talking about hardware. This is where you got to clear your mind to go ahead and say, one, no one digital voice mode is going to exist, but how am I going to put my pieces of the puzzle together? All right. So now we're going to talk about a hybrid method. So we have network, which the signal's already coming in, it's going into the network and blah, blah, blah. Now we're going ahead and we're going to talk about a hybrid method. So what a hybrid method is basically sort of the combination of network and hardware. But what we're doing in this case here is that we're saying, okay, you know what? What we're doing is we're having something come in purely in RF, okay? And right away, I am sending that signal over the network, and then it's going to go ahead and come out the RF side and the other one in that different digital voice format. But you just said, wait a minute, John, wait. But at the network level, you said that before. It's coming in, it's converting to the network. Right. When you're at the network level, you're having the mode already come into the server. With the hybrid method, you're actually going ahead and having it RF device to device and then back out RF. So that's where it's kind of different, where it's the hardware mode, because what you're doing is in essence, if you look on the screen here, this red, the green, and the blue, if you really kind of think of that, that's just like one server doing it all. So you have hardware coming in for the RF, but then it's feeding one server, and then that one server is spitting it out, okay, on there. So that's kind of where that hybrid method is. Once again, one device is doing it at a network level. The other setup is hardware, where you have a radio go into like a device or a controller and then comes out on the other digital mode, where in this case, this is kind of how it is. It's all in one. We have the RF, we have that hardware, but then it goes to network, and it's a very short network hop to be able to get to the other formats. Now, what is a good hybrid method? Well, a good hybrid method would be like those spot devices I made a reference to. You go in via RF, right on that device, it takes, say, the Fusion digital voice via RF, and then it converts it to DMR and sends a DMR down the network right away. It doesn't have to come in Fusion, go down the network on Fusion to a server, which converts it from Fusion to DMR, then goes ahead and sends it out to the DMR network. No, it doesn't do that way. This would be a hybrid model that I'm talking about, where in RF, converts it at the device, sends it out. All right. One drawback to this hybrid method is you're going to run into a lot of IP and data costs and constant monitoring for the connections. This method by far is going to produce the best audio And the reason is you're not transcoding, you're not doing anything like that. It's within a device. You're not going in a method, converting to data, going to a server goes to another server, you know, that whole chain there. It's basically, like I said, RFN converts it locally or right at the device and then sends it down the network. But if you have a network failure, you're not going to necessarily be able to transcode out to those other devices. So that's where this whole thing is. Which one is going to work best? Well, it's really going to be dependent on what you want to go ahead and do. So let's talk about now the kind of last part of this presentation is digital voice and ARES, RACES, and MCOM. Once again, we're talking about a lot of stuff here. We're talking about really not only trying to connect the networks and get them all to work or plan to play together, but you're talking about changing attitudes here, and you're talking about changing attitudes dramatically, okay? Because it's no longer a situation of, you know what, yeah, I don't have that frequency in my radio, too bad, so sad. Now it's like, oh, do you have Fusion? Do you have DMR? You know, do you have this? No, I don't. Oh, okay. What do you have? Well, I have this. Well, let's use analog. Well, we don't have the analog infrastructure, or digital is easier to do, okay, because with the hotspot devices, those certain things like that, you can hotspot it to your cell phone. You know, I could take my cell phone and I can hotspot it to my Zoom Zumbo whatever spot, and then it goes ahead and converts it over, and then I have a mobile network for me. So this is totally the left Twix, right Twix situation. You're gonna have people who are gonna be in favor of this thing. Let's do it. Let's plan it. Let's get it going. Then you're gonna have people that are gonna say, no way in hell, don't talk to me about it. You're dumb, you're stupid. Why are you even thinking about that? Analog's the way to go. You know, so really, once again, your own discretion, but think about how it goes. So right away, the concept and usage has advantages, disadvantages, and myths across the board. I would say we have done more of an injustice because of our personalities, or hamitudes, as I've called it in the past, and ideas about using new technology or saying, hey, I think we should do this. Oh, I don't have that radio. I'm not going to do it then. Okay. The one digital voice format is not going to happen. I've said it a dying breath, and people are like, no, there's going to win. You know, look at the VHF and Beta Max, and then the Blu-ray, no, yeah, DVD, Blu-ray, and the HD DVDs. Yeah, I said, you know, I'm sorry, it's not going to work that way, okay? And if it was, then everybody needs to pick a different digital data mode, okay? If you like FT8, if you like JT65, if you like RTTY, if you like PAC, you like those kind of things like that, okay, that's fine. So someone is going to pick their mode, and that's going to be the only one we use, and then everybody else has to give up the mode that they use or they enjoy to use your mode, and that's it. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in data. It's not going to happen in voice, okay? Once again, proper planning and usage. I can't stress that enough. I've worked with business on the business side, commercial side, amateur side, and when people talk about this, they go ahead and say this and this and this and this and this. Guess what? I say, what was your plan? What did you want to do? Oh, I want to have, you know, this mode talk to this mode, or I want this user to be able to talk to this user across different networks. Well, what was your plan? Well, I just thought, you know, we could just do it. What do you mean just do it? How, you know, how's your connection? Is it a network? Is it a hardware? Is it a hybrid? What is it? Well, I don't know. No, so that's what's going to be. Now, one of the other things we're going to kind of talk a little bit about here real quick is just a brush on analog. And the reason I say about brushing on analog is because on my dirty workbench here, I don't really talk about it in the presentation, but I'm going to show you. This is a URIX interface. I use it for my Raspberry Pi, which goes and feeds, show you the radio over here, nope, little cord over here, but this one goes ahead and feeds my analog radio. And what it does is it helps bridge the analog user. So remember, can't leave anybody behind. Now we actually have a really easy mode in a way, because now if we're doing network level connections with digital voice, it's going out to analog, and then analog can now reach out to the analog users. P25 can go this way, DMR this way, Fusion this way, D-Star this way. You know, all those things like that we can now do because of the way digital voice works. So let's talk about the advantages. So number one, easy to deploy ad hoc infrastructure through the usage of micro equipment, example spot device. So let's do a realistic scenario. Okay, you have a network, you have a digital voice network that's up and running. I have to go to the hospital, and I'm in the EOC of the hospital. I've used this example a lot. I'm in the EOC of the hospital, and I'm in the basement, and I can't get out of the basement with my handheld radio. Okay, I can't get out. Repeater doesn't receive down there. I can't receive the repeater down there. How am I going to be able to get out? This is where digital has an advantage, because now I could take that hotspot device, I hook up into the hospital internet, that kind of thing like that on there. And, you know, now, hey, guess what? My radio's talking locally, or I can talk directly into that network and I can go out there. Now, I'm going to stop right there because I know there's people in their brains right now. You're saying you need the internet. You're saying you need the internet. No, let's take the term internet and throw it out. I know there's going to be a couple of naysayers out there right now that are saying, nope, internet, it's bad, it fails because you use the internet. Nope. Okay, how about this? How about our other, presenter today? He's talking about ARES, he's talking about mesh networks. That's using the internet, but it's not using it through like an ISP. You're passing IP data traffic through the use of radios and mesh networks and ubiquity networks, those kind of things like that, okay? So in that regard, you just need an IP connection. So let's change the term to IP connection. And when we start to substitute out IP for internet, we start to go ahead and realize the saying, wait a minute, whoa, wait a minute. I don't need the actual internet from, you know, Comcast or Frontier or whoever you have. Wait a minute, I could be a ham, I could be resourceful. I just need to pass this IP traffic from here to there. You'd be surprised at how easy IP traffic passing can actually become. All right. So ad hoc infrastructure allows repurposing that old analog equipment for dual purpose. I probably, like a majority of you, had old GM300 devices sitting around and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff, gathering dust. What am I going to do with it? What am I going to do with it? I can buy some of those devices and I can add it to the back of that radio. And now I can make it become a local access point for digital voice. I could strap two together and make a digital repeater. Oh, and by the way, when you use a digital repeater, not all digital repeaters require an internet connection to function in digital. All right. So that's where that repurposing the old analog equipment might come into play. Okay. Allows for dual purposes, such as ability to send data and use voice through one device. So yes, certain things are going to be able to do that. And if they can't send a form or something like that, let's be honest, folks, a form at, let's say, 1200 baud, not really that fast. But I can send other sort of data through there, such as text messaging or private calls or alerts or something like that. So now what I can go ahead and do is hey, there's a lot of traffic going on and stuff like that, but I need someone to move a position, okay? I can get on there and type, you know, move to position 2 or move to the hospital, send that message, and boom, instead of me getting on there and like, N9 VAO, here's N9 UPC. Waiting. Okay, N9 UPC, go ahead. Hey, N9 VAO, can you please go ahead and move from your current location and assignment over to position number 2 over there for me? Copy, I'll move over to position number 2 for you. Okay, thank you very much. N9 UPC. Okay, N9 VAO. Right, how much time was that? Where I could pick it up and sort of like a cell phone, you know, kind of do that, type in, send, bloop, it goes ahead and sends out, and now that person receives it. All right. So kind of the neat part about that with digital voice on there. And it allows access to different networks if, once again, correctly set up through different devices. So no longer do I have these users that, okay, we have analog and you have fusion and you have analog and DMR. Well, let's try using analog. Well, we can't make the connection because there isn't a repeater, there isn't this, there isn't this, there isn't this. Well, guess what? Now they could talk through the networks to one another to be able to do that. A good case in point of this network is I run the Wisconsin link. Now, Wisconsin link is based off the concept of where we're integrating DMR, we're integrating fusion, and then we are also working to integrate P25. We're also working to integrate NextN, and we're also looking at, some people have expressed interest in D-Star. So what we're doing is we're tying these networks together. It's a slow process. It's not something you're going to be able to really do overnight because you have to set up audio levels, you have to do these things. But once again, what Wisconsin Link gives you the ability to do, is that it gives you the ability to say, hey, I need to be able to talk to these different people. Now, how does that work in regards to that thing? So, for example, with the Fusion side, you can go and use different access points like the hotspots. You can use wires X and go into the network that way. And then it's going to branch off to those different users. DMR, same thing. You're going to use a talk group. P25, you're going to use a talk group. Nextend, you're going to use a talk group. Okay. And really, it comes down to just switching channels. So if you have the network and the infrastructure linked together and set up correctly, you're not going to have a problem, because now all that person needs to do is they can roam and move through their network. I can roam and move through my network, but then when I need to communicate one another, boom, I find a channel that connects. So everybody else is talking on their little networks here, and I simply reach out, sort of like an umbilical cord, if you really think about it, between the two networks. When my conversation is ended, boom, the networks can separate and they could still talk and do their own thing. So that's a real big advantage in my mind, in my opinion, to digital voice and ARES, RACES, and NCOM. Public safety does this all the time, if you really think about it. Like if you're in Wisconsin, you're a good example. Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee versus the, I think, county of Milwaukee, one other agency, are two separate networks. So city of Milwaukee has one type of digital voice, digital technology, band, frequency, everything like that. Milwaukee and county, and I think they're tied in another county. I'm sure there is somehow, but they got their little radio network and everything like that. They're talking together. And then, like, for example, the state of Wisconsin has a statewide radio network that they're talking on there. Well, now we're talking different bands. Now we're talking different things. They're doing this with these different connection and networks. They're forming an umbilical cord from this network on this frequency on this design to this network on this frequency with this design and this coverage down to that one. So they all can coexist on there. All right, so let's talk about disadvantages. While we're happy about advantages, we do have some disadvantages. So it usually does require an IP access or internet kind connection. Once again, I want you to use the term IP access. So yes, if I can't get my IP traffic from my device out to a network, okay, or out to the network, then I'm going to have communication issues, and that can happen. But guess what? Same thing can happen when we're talking about analog and we're not talking about non-digital voices. We can have linked repeaters go down. We could have interference. We could have all these different things about it. What we really did is we just kind of changed the players on the chessboard. All right. Some people are not wanting to or afraid of digital. When I've talked to people and in my club and stuff, and they've gone and said, like, John, this digital thing is just, I don't know, who am I going to talk to? And, is this the right digital mode? And, I got to buy a new radio, and I got to be this and this and this and this. And people will put up tens of thousands of excuses because they're afraid, because they don't want to go ahead and do it. That's fine. Let them be afraid of digital. You as a system designer, you as a system user, go ahead and do that. Remember I just talked about, a few seconds ago about, like, a little bit ago about the All-Star Link. All-Star Link works great in this thing. You can bridge that analog connection out and then take it and then put it into the digital world and vice versa. So there is that ability to do that, but people are afraid to do that. The only change that people like is from a vending machine. That's what my grandpa said, and that statement holds so truthful to this day. Equipment can be somewhat difficult to operate or use. Yeah, that's the biggest one, I think I would say, why people don't want to do it. You're looking at, if you're bringing over like DMR or P25 or Nextend, you have to have a computer to program the radios. You have to buy software. Software can range anywhere from like $125 up to like $500. Then you got to buy the programming cable, and they get you on the programming cable prices. You're looking $200-300 for some programming cables. Some are cheaper, some are more expensive, obviously, on there. But then you want to make a simple change. You want to be like, oh shoot, you know what? We went through that area, and it's the wrong CTCSS tone, or I want to use this other repeater today. Okay, I got to take my radio. Look, shoot, I don't have it in my radio. Why don't you have it in your radio? Well, I didn't program it because I didn't think about it. Oh, okay, let me take my computer, open up my computer, program cable, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah, that can be real problematic. Some people don't understand, for example, people don't understand color code, time slot, talk group. That's like really difficult for them. And then the last disadvantage is digital to analog voice can sometimes have horrible audio. Now, after I just said, let them have a digital voice, or to analog. Usually digital to analog is great because digital is a series of ones and zeros. It's a solid in there. If you're in there usually good with solid, with digital, you're usually going to have a good conversation. It's going to come out on digital. I've had people that have said that when I've talked from digital to analog, they were listening analog, I was talking digital, they didn't know without me telling them, and they thought I was just going ahead and holding my nose like that. And I'm thinking, oh, that's pretty good. But when it's going analog to digital, that's where it gets kind of hairy, and that's where it can get bad. If you have a scratchy signal, okay, like a static filled one, on the digital side, what they're going to hear, it's not going to be, it's going to be like that, because you're thinking about it, we're not taking voice now, we're taking noise. We're converting noise into ones and zeros, and we're sending ones and zeros down the network. So that can be very hairy in and of itself on there, and that's why sometimes people use that as a disadvantage to digital voice. All right, let's talk about some myths. Once again, here we are with the myths. The myths keep the advancement, I would say. Once again, digital voice and connecting and MCOM usage of it, it keeps it down, okay? So once again, the first myth, digital cannot be linked to analog. That is incorrect. Incorrect. You have networks that are at the network level, people are able to connect. You have at the hardware level, people are able to connect. And then you also have at that hybrid level. So if you really think about that hybrid level, I mean, you have a signal come in, and you have once again one of these all-star link interface devices. Well, guess what? That's coming off the Raspberry Pi. That Raspberry Pi is decoding it, and then right away, boom, it's sending it out over the air in analog. So it works, it exists, and people just say it doesn't, and it does. It may not sound the best. Of course, you're mixing digital to analog, and if you've ever heard digital, it's different sounding than analog, and it has to be because of what's going on there. Okay, myth number 2, all or certain technologies are proprietary. Once again, wrong. The digital voice formats that are out there are not proprietary. DVSI sells a chip, which makes it proprietary to DVSI, but the formats are open. There's many great strides and advancements going through to make the digital protocols not so much chip dependent, but more advantage on there. But once again, there's no proprietariness. A lot of them are based off of open standards, and that's how the radios are made, with that open standard. Okay. Myth number 3, you all need to be on the same system. Technically, no. The nice thing about a digital system, there is a level of being fluid to it, a level of expansion, that you might be on this digital mode in this group or stuff like that on there, but someone might be able to quickly bridge the network to the group to a network, and that network can go out to other people. You can almost have sort of an ad hoc thing. Like once again, it's like, oh, okay, hey, I got my Zoom spot, jumbo spot, hot spot, open spot, whatever the case may be. And then they may be able to go from their device and join your network or where you're at directly. So no, you don't need to be on the same system. And digital usage or linking needs the internet. Once again, nope, that's not correct. You can actually have linking done via the use of mesh networks. Anything that makes this IP packet leave here and goes to this point here, and while the IP packet is going from here to here, that it stays in its most whole form in order to not have a high bit error rate, and in order to be able to be put out and not have any loss of data or information on there. So those are the myths of it, which once again, for little certain ones, derails the possibility sometimes on there. All right. This is where I would get to the normal discussion, and I'm just going to tell you, a lot of stuff went through my mind. Even every time I read this, my brain's like, oh my God, it's a lot of information to cover. We're going to do questions and answer here, but I just want to wrap up a few things on there. Once again, highlights 5 different digital voice modes that are out there. 2 are amateur, 3 are public safety LMR type based. There's never going to be one ultimate design digital voice format for everything. And digital linking for ARES RACES, making those mesh networks, making I shouldn't say the mesh network, but the digital voice networks does exist on there. but it's going to be done, and it has to be done by you, and has to be done for certain planning. Remember, we're not trying to get frequencies and channels to match up anymore. We're trying to get the user on this network and the user on this network and find the commonality on how to connect to the two of them. Once again, Wisconsin Link does some of that on there, and that's through a planning process of saying, hey, I got to have, tab A into slot B and proceed from there. So thank you very much for listening to this presentation. We'll go ahead and I think we're going to schedule a break here, and then we will start to answer questions here.